What's up, everyone? Today in History with Memes, we're taking a look at World War I, getting you ready for your exam, or just so you can look smart at the coffee shop. So after initial neutrality in World War I, you know how America be, we never show up on time to those world wars. But as the war went on, Wilson and the United States were having difficulty in trying to stay out of this war. In fact, in the election of 1916, Wilson is running for re-election, and meanwhile, Europe is a hot mess because remember, World War I is one of our first major industrial wars. There's all this new technology. There's trench warfare, there's these horrible new weapons like the tank and poison gas, and this is causing widespread death and destruction amongst the various parties involved. Now, after initial neutrality in World War I, there was a lot of different things happening. The sinking of ships like the Lusitania. A lot of ships were being sunk. You have the Zimmermann telegram that Germany sends to Mexico, intercepted by the British, and this causes a lot of Americans to demand that President Wilson do something about it to preserve American neutrality and our honor. And as with all things in history, things get way more complicated because you recall, yes, Americans died aboard the British ship, the Lusitania, but that ship was also carrying weapons, which the Germans didn't want the Allies to get a hold of. So with all these things, violations of our neutrality, the Zimmermann telegram, the nation entered the conflict. And the war had been going on since 1914. In America in 1917, April said, "What up? We here." And it's important you know, this was departing from the U.S. foreign policy tradition of non-involvement in European affairs. And another factor you should keep in mind is it's also in response to Woodrow Wilson's call for the defense of humanitarian and democratic principles. Wilson really believed that World War I would be the war to end all wars. And remember, Wilson, he has this moral diplomacy. So not only is he trying to end war forever, but he also claims to be fighting it to make the world safe for democracy. And there's a little irony there because American women are going to be protesting him during the war because of their lack of voting rights. And not to mention, African Americans throughout the American South were denied the right to vote. So yes, we get into the war a little bit late, but we go into it with these lofty ideals. And although the American Expeditionary Forces played a relatively limited role in combat, the U.S. entry helped to tip the balance of the conflict in favor of the Allies. So think about America's combat role in World War I in the words of Drake. "We're here for a good time, not a long time." Oh, he's horrible. Although the Great War is not fought on U.S. soil, it's important you also know about the impact of World War I on the home front. The increased demand for war production and labor during World War I and the sequel World War II, and the economic difficulties of the 1930s led many Americans to migrate to urban centers in search of economic opportunities. During both wars, you have the government forming different agencies trying to regulate war production. You have women getting new opportunities as the men are off fighting. And you also have, in a Great Migration during and after World War I, African Americans escaping segregation, those Jim Crow laws, racial violence with the rise of the Klan and lynching, and limited economic opportunity in the South. They moved to the North and the West where they found new opportunities but still encountered discrimination. Another aspect of the home front that you should know about is this: official restrictions on freedom of speech grew during World War I. So we claim to be fighting this war to make the world safe for democracy. So not only do you have various groups like women and African Americans in many states being unable to vote, at least at the onset of the war, you also have restrictions on freedom of speech with things like the Sedition Act. Prompting these restrictions on freedom of speech also was increased anxiety about radicalism, led to a Red Scare. There's this fear we're going to have a communist revolution. Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution happened during the war, and this leads to attacks on organized labor and unions and immigrant culture. You're going to see a lot of this play out during the Palmer raids right after the war, as well as the Sacco and Vanzetti trial during the 1920s. Aside from the home front, you should know World War I and its aftermath intensified ongoing debates about the nation's role in the world and how best to achieve national security and pursue America's interests. Remember, Wilson had his 14 points. This was his plan to kind of create peace for generations to come. But a lot of the European powers, especially three of the big four, England, Italy, and France, largely rejected Wilson's 14 points, and they wanted to increase their colonial holdings and kind of punish Germany at the end of the war. Wilson was deeply disappointed in his 14 points being largely abandoned, but he does have this League of Nations that he wants to get put in place. And despite Wilson's deep involvement in post-war negotiations, he's over in Europe trying to make a deal. The U.S. Senate refused to ratify the Treaty of Versailles or to join the League of Nations. So the Senate, led by Republicans, basically saying, nah, we're not joining this thing. And the guy who creates the League of Nations, Wilson, and the country that creates it, the US, doesn't end up joining the League. Now, if you want some more information about World War I, get all the little details that help you get all super smart, make sure you check out the link in the description. We have that right here, aligned to some of the famous APUSH books. And if you need any help in AP History or AP Gov, make sure you check out the website, apushexplained.com. And as always, have a beautiful day. Peace.